inequality continues to define America. And here in Baltimore, that growing divide is easy to see. Great wealth and abject poverty exist side by side, sometimes separated by just a few blocks. And nowhere is that more apparent than the subject of our show, Perkins Homes. It's a low-income development that houses over 600 families, but it's also right next door to the city's Gold Coast, known as Harbor East. And now the city has turned over the rights to overhaul it to a developer who's built gleaming towers with help of big tax breaks. And it's a move that's raising concerns among residents and advocates. And it raises a question: will gentrification envelop this community like it has others? To help me answer this and more is a panel of people who know the subject matter intimately. Lucky Crosby is a former whistleblower for the Baltimore Housing Department. Taya Graham is a reporter for the Real News Network. And Jeff Singer is a former executive director of healthcare for the homeless and professor at University of Maryland School of Social Work. But before we get to our conversation, we have a report from Taya Graham.
I feel like I'm not a part of that world. It seems like it's another world over there.
From the window of her apartment in Perkins Homes, Tanita Wilson can see a Baltimore much different from where she lives.
It's beautiful. I can lay on my bed and look and dream that one day maybe I'll have an apartment or something beautiful like that. But that's all I can do is just look and observe.
It is a world of gleaming towers and pricey homes, known as Harbor East. But she took us on a tour of her apartment, part of the low-income housing project called Perkins Homes, where the city's largesse is nowhere to be seen.
Now here is where I have stuck foam in. And when you close one hole up, they'll eat right next to it.
She has battled mice, black mold, and insects. The water damage remains unfixed. She has even experienced harassment from maintenance workers.
Either they're trying to get your phone number, they're trying to have sex with you, they want to charge you for all of these things. So it makes you really not even want to call them.
But she still has hope and dreams of change, which is why she, along with other residents, spoke to the Real News about the just announced plan to revitalize Perkins.
They told us that they found a developer for the property, but they didn't tell us who. They said that they spoke with the mayor. The mayor is going to give them a piece of property for them to start building.
The city said last week it awarded a company called Beatty Development the right to redevelop the 17-acre site, home to over 600 people.
And I am worried because they have said several things, you know, and didn't keep their word.
And most important, will the city's plan include the community that at times seems not just forgotten, but ignored?
That they're going to move all of us back in here and it's going to be a better place and all that, because half of the people not going to be able to come back at all.
All right, so Taya, what do we know about this deal? I mean, Perkins Homes is sort of always been rumored to be on the chopping block because of its proximity to the Inner Harbor. You know, the city just announced. What did the city say?
Well, first off, Perkins Homes is a 75-year-old complex that houses low-income residents. There are families that have been there literally for generations. Well, right now, Beatty Development is making a play to be able to revitalize Perkins projects and once again receive federal and state subsidies and tax subsidies to do so.
But we think,
well, that follows Beatty's pattern.
And Beatty Development, Development Harbor Point, right?
Exactly. This follows his pattern of, for example, using enterprise zones, which means you get state funding because you're using an area, a low-income area, in order to say, I want to do this development project here. I promise I will build up infrastructure and make lovely new homes for these low-income residents. Please give me this state money. So he has used state money, federal money, and local money before to fund his projects and get tax subsidies.
Well, Lucky, there weren't many details about the deal for Perkins Homes to redevelop it, but they did say something very interesting, and it said, we will have housing for all levels of income. I mean, you've got 600 families there. What do you think that means? How do you interpret that kind of cryptic language about the future of Perkins Homes?
600 families, 1,400 people roughly live there. When I'm concerned, whenever you hear billionaires are now going to do what's right for poor folk. Nobody object to that Perkins home needs some renovation. What the objection is, why do you have to displace those families? If you bringing in units, you should already account for the 600 families. So you need to add the 600 units to the development you're doing. And when you hear these cold words, we've been here before.
Yes.
About how the developers come in and they're gonna increase the community. And you just said something, mixed income. Do you really think someone's going to spend $400,000 for a home and knowingly know that you have a low-income person? The stigma of it that they put on it. So we know that's going to be counterproductive for not only that $400,000 family, but the low-income family.
Wow. Well, Jeff, we talked a lot. You worked with homeless, healthcare for the homeless for years, and we've talked a lot about housing. Is this another, one of the rumors has been the city just wants to convert all these public housing units into private and get rid of, low-income people. Is this another step in that direction, in your opinion?
I fear that it likely is. The gentrification that's already begun, we have Harbor East, we have Harbor Point, we have Fells Point, and Perkins Homes is right in the middle of all that.
Right.
So what's the chance that the 600 units which have been dedicated to low-income folks, what's the chance that they'll have that many units in this new development? Bill Clinton eliminated the requirement that when public housing units are destroyed or rehabbed, that they have to be replaced on a one-to-one basis. Bill Clinton eliminated that.
Many things of legacy he's given
Oh,
us.
indeed,
Yes.
indeed.
Right.
But some cities decided to keep that policy. Seattle, San Francisco. We begged the city of Baltimore to keep that policy. Oh no, we were told by a variety of housing commissioners, no, we can't do that here in Baltimore.
Well, Catherine Pugh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I just wanted to add that, we're saying we want to have housing replaced for people, but the thing is, the city over the past 25 years, the public housing has dwindled by 30%, and there's only, let's say, around 12,000 or fewer public housing units left, and another 4,000 are going to be sold to private developers. So if you look at this trend, we're losing our public housing.
Well, I've heard Catherine Pugh say this. I've heard former Mayor Sheila Dixon, and Catherine Pugh is current mayor of Baltimore. Public housing is not like a lifetime solution. It's only supposed to be temporary.
Yes.
Well, Jeff, why don't you react to that? And I'll get Lucky next.
Because historically, there is no support for that notion. And yes, we hear it all the time.
Right.
Every housing commissioner of Baltimore has said it, the mayors always say it. But no, when public housing was first created in 1937, excuse me, when it was first created, there was no language about it being transitional housing and people should go, it's a starter home and then you buy your housing. Most countries have vibrant public housing sectors. We don't.
Yeah, and Lucky, what do you think? I mean, do you believe in the theory that this is really just a matter of just completely eliminating public housing in Baltimore in the long run?
I believe completely in eliminating public housing. But when you have the bourgeois and the elite of Baltimore City now justifying because now it look bad, it's an eyesore. Well, in the city, in their charter, they supposed to provide decent and affordable and stable housing, what they have not done because they allow the property to go decayed the way they have. And now you see, because we have no progressive public housing policies in this city, now you have the money grabbers, what I call them, coming in, grabbing, making promises, and the citizens of Baltimore is hurt. But let's keep in mind, when you talk about Perkins, where it sit and it's in what you would call that
It's like
developer
it's a developer
mine.
Corridor.
Exactly.
It's linking to like a basically like ritzy waterfront property.
Right,
Yeah.
but the article Sunday spoke about a $30 million grant.
Right.
So, in other words, the $30 million grant going to go to who? The developer, not to fix up Perkins Homes. And let's understand, you cannot keep on displacing people at the rate that this city have when we have the vacant houses crisis that we have, and no one is addressing that. We need a progressive policy that take in the humanity of people.
Well, just so people understand, I mean, you have, listening to this is very interesting because you have Harbor Point, Harbor East, which are just within a stone's throw.
Exactly.
And you have literally all the sort of jewels, let's say, of Baltimore. And the one place where people can live of low income and have access to those amenities is Perkins Homes.
Exactly.
And
it should be kept for that reason alone.
Now, Tay, we had a very poignant, you did a very poignant interview with a young woman who lived there who talked about that. Tell me about the interview, how people in Perkins Homes reacting to this news.
Well, first I spoke to 4 or 5 women in Perkins Homes. One in particular was named Tanita Wilson, and she was kind enough to let me into her home to show me. She had some pictures of what her home looked like before the repairs happened. So let me just give you, she told me when I asked her, what is it like living in Perkins Homes? She said, it's like living in a jail without bars. And that just really hurt my heart to hear that.
And what did she mean by that? I mean, because that's interesting that people don't understand about public housing. She can't have guests.
She can't have have guests. For one,
family members can't live with her.
So that one of the things that she mentioned was that she would want to have a family member come over for the weekend or for the week during the holidays, and that it was very difficult for her to do so without risking eviction, because you're not supposed to, they're concerned that if you have a family member in the home, that you're actually trying to have another person secretly on the lease.
Right.
And so it's very difficult to have something simple like having your grandmother who's sick stay with you for 2 weeks while you take care of her. Just simple things like that. That simple liberties that you have if you are in your own home or you're renting your own home that you don't have if you live in public housing. And I just want to add that the residents are really confused. The community really has no idea what Beatty Development's plans are. They know that they said they're going to come in and fix up the housing. They were told that they were going to get to stay. But they've been told that they said on average every 5 years, you know, for decades now, that a developer is going to come in, they're going to fix up the houses, they're going to let them stay, and everything's going to be fine. But we know that's not true. Just last summer, there was a Virginia-based group, I believe, called CRC, that was going to have, you know, engage in a $200 million renovation project, and it fell through, and we have no answers as to why.
Well, Jeff, at the top of the show, I talked about you know, income inequality.
Yes.
Has there been historically a program that was supposed to be intended for people of low income that has enriched the richest? And of course, our own president has participated in this, and our own president, Donald Trump. I mean,
your president.
Right. Well, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Somebody's president.
Somebody's president. But the point is, you have this program that's become like sort of. It looks like Beatty's going to get a big payout, and it looks like big, already wealthy people. Isn't this really like sort of the point of the spear in terms of creating more income inequality, the way these deals are structured?
Well, absolutely. It began actually with the Nixon administration. Public housing was a fairly vibrant kind of program beginning in 1937. And then the Nixon administration created this Section 8 program. And Section 8 was a way to produce profits for private developers through what used to be public housing. And much of the money that used to support public housing then went into this private program called Section 8. Trump is among many who have made millions of dollars in housing poor folks using public dollars. Trump apparently makes at least $5 million a year from one project in Brooklyn, New York.
This is all federal money.
This is federal. This is our hard-earned tax dollars.
Private enterprises they like to, you know, pride themselves on. They're actually living out the public coffers here.
That's right. That's right. And it does exacerbate income inequality. If we just built up the public housing program instead of giving the profits to these private developers, we could house many more people with the same amount of money, and folks could run their own housing in a democratic way. This is the way it's done in lots of other countries, but we can't figure out how to do it.
I mean, it's not our responsibility to give Trump enough money so he doesn't have to sell condos to Russians, right? That's not that's not our responsibility. Go ahead.
You mentioned a point about income inequality.
Yeah, sure.
You have the housing executive branch is one of the highest paid in the country.
The housing executive branch of
HABC, Baltimore City.
So just so people know, Baltimore City's housing authority is one of the highest paid in the country.
In the country. It was the fifth largest, but the way they twinkle with numbers, you don't know that anymore.
Yeah.
But the point that I'm making, you have six-figure executives, and you have the employees that does the maintenance work, can't even afford to live in public housing that they work in.
That's incredible.
And when you say the income inequality, it has always been that you pay the top all this money and the little crumbs trickle down to the employee, which happen to be union employees.
And that's going to get worse under what's known as a RAD program, which is another program about privatization of public. That's going to get worse, right?
Because you're going to lose union employees, and the private developers can set the wages where they want to set them at. So see, so we not only just eliminating the public housing part, we're eliminating the employees that soon will need the public housing subsidies because they won't be employed anymore.
Well, Taya, there's another piece to this too, and you know, I know not everyone watching this lives in Baltimore, but there's another piece that we looked at a year ago that's Old Town Mall.
Right.
That also, right, involves who? I mean, it's sort of...
Sure. I mean, the Old Town Mall, just for the record, used to be a vibrant outdoor shopping center for people of all walks of life to be able to enjoy, especially middle and low income people.
And it's just basically a little bit north of Perkins Homes and basically...
And it's like a pedestrian shopping mall, an outdoor shopping mall.
But now it's completely abandoned.
Right. And so once again, BD Development has stepped to the forefront and said, I would be happy to participate in renovating this. Now, one thing that's interesting is there's this two groups, Change for Real and the Ngoma Foundation, who have said, oh, the next time a developer comes in, we're actually going to have a plan in place. We actually have like a holistic community supporting program where we want to make sure we have retail stores for small local business owners. We want to make sure that there's accessibility and affordability for the residents that actually live there, not just for the wealthy of Baltimore City. Because what we're seeing here, as you mentioned, income inequality, is once again we're getting the two Baltimores. And what we have to wonder is what's going to happen to Perkins Homes? Are we going to keep the residents there, the families there, or are they going to be clustered into a small section, and this is going to be part of this huge swath of waterfront and connected property for the wealthy elite of our city to enjoy and have be their playground?
And keep in mind, now you talk about the corridor of Old Town Mall.
Right.
10 feet away, set Monument East, another public development. Right. 300 feet across the street,
Pleasant View Gardens.
Latrobe.
Oh, right, was there?
Latrobe.
Was there?
Exactly.
Right, but there's Pleasant View Gardens there now, so you could really...
And Pleasant View Gardens.
You could have a mini-city.
Exactly. Pleasant View is under HABC, but they privatized that and bought in another management company.
So you know what, that begs the question I would want to know from Lucky. Does that mean that these housing projects have been allowed to decay and fall into disrepair so that private developers have to be invited in to save the day?
100% correct.
Okay.
Keep in mind, there was capital investment funds that's supposed to be used for the development to make sure for the major stuff, like the infrastructure would be like the plumbing and roofs to make sure. The money always been diverted, and they've sent painters to do the work that's supposed to be done to maintain them. And yes, to answer your question 100%, yes, it had been left to decay because they wanted to sell the property at a low price to developers.
Now, Jeff, you know, obviously we have a problem with subsidizing low-income people, but the city's had no problem giving wealthy developers hundreds of millions. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's a national policy. The mortgage interest deduction is an enormous taxpayer subsidy that goes mostly to people with incomes over $100,000 a year.
But
most middle-class people can't even get the mortgage interest
But
deduction.
even more specifically in Baltimore.
But we've given really large subsidies to developers all over the city. We've given, we've had 14 TIFs that went $14 to $1 to projects that would benefit poor and middle class people.
And just so people understand, TIFs are tax increment financing, which basically means you can take the money you would pay towards your loans or mortgage and reinvest it basically in your property, because your property taxes, you don't have to pay property taxes basically. But bottom line is, a TIF means you don't have to pay property taxes.
Yes, and it has lots of negative ramifications, among them being school appropriations, because the city school system has lost hundreds of millions of dollars because of these TIFs. And when this was raised during the Harbor Point discussions, the city denied that that was the case.
They did. They did.
And of course it was, and the city has had a $130 million deficit in the schools, in part because of these TIFs.
Yeah, and also, both the projects, the major ones, Port Covington, which is $600 million, and Harbor Point, which is $100 million, they're both run into delays, right? I mean, it's questionable. The $600 million Port Covington TIF was to Under Armour CEO Kevin Plank. Well, I mean, his company now is kind of reeling, and it's not, that plan includes a lot of increase in employees in his firm, and if that doesn't happen, I mean, Jeff, are we giving up generational wealth here?
Well, it appears so. We have never had a plan to assure that most Baltimoreans had decent, safe, affordable housing. We've begged the city to do this for decades. They've refused to do it. They act on an ad hoc basis, and the ad hoc actions generally benefit wealthy developers who make the campaign contributions, who belong to the same country clubs, who send their kids to the same private schools. There's a real class divide in the U.S., and we can see how it works in the public policy that supports private development.
Yeah. Keep in mind, to me it was seen that the Housing Authority will hire an independent inspection company to come in and inspect every unit at Perkins, starting at Perkins. Then you create a cost effect, what would it cost to redevelop those 600 units? Today, none of this has been done. When they bring in consultants, the consultants is already meeting with the developer. not with what's best for the residents in Perkins. And again, the Baltimore City Council have no authority over the housing authority.
Yeah, because it's technically like an independent agency. The mayor appoints the board members, and it sort of operates outside the scope of legislative oversight.
Right.
So they're basically free to do whatever they want, so long as the mayor's happy.
Exactly. So you talk about now 6 people making the decision: the board of commissioner, the executive director, and the mayor. It's no accountability in that, because most of the meetings are held while most of the people that are affected are at work.
Yeah, wow. Taya, now there was a big scandal at Gilmore Homes, which is where Freddie Gray was arrested, about sex in exchange for repairs, where women were asked to give up sex to get their homes repaired. Now, you heard some pretty shocking allegations at Ferguson. Tell us about that.
Despite the fact that there were calls for then head of housing, Graziano, to resign, and I've heard from Lucky that he's moved on to bigger and better things, right?
And hood.
But unfortunately, it seems that sex for repairs is still occurring, and there were women that I spoke to in Perkins Homes who told me that to get simple repairs, that they are often requested to give money to maintenance workers for repairs that are supposed to be free, or to offer sexual services. And one woman, and I won't say her name because I don't, want to call her out in that way, but she said, what do? You've got to take care of your kids. Some of them mentioned having like the children with asthma or disabilities and things like that, and saying, you've got black mold in the house, it's affecting your children. What do you do? Sometimes you just have to give in. And that is just devastating.
Now, Lucky, you were instrumental in exposing what was going on at Gilmore Homes about the sex for exchange. How is this still going on? Because there was a settlement where the city paid like $6 million. There were indictments. Of course, the 2 men were not convicted because the witnesses didn't show up. But how is this still going on, if it is going on?
Let's be perfectly clear what you have here. You have a lack of leadership here. The Housing Authority has a safety officer, the same position that I have, the HABC had one. And to be direct to answer your question, the lady just said it's still going on and what is being done. See, housing wanted to cover this underbelly up that's been going on for decades, and now it blew up in their face. But my point to that, no maintenance man is allowed to ask for money to do his or her work. No maintenance man is allowed to ask for sex for doing their work. And because the culture of intimidation comes from 417, most of the women and the men are afraid to report this because it goes to, put it like, there's no inspector general. So if I make a complaint, the complaint go to the HR director. The HR director then have the autonomy to say, let's transfer that person, let's transfer that employee.
They can do eviction proceedings, right? I mean, sometimes.
Well, yes, they can. Under your lease, they can, just like you mentioned about the young lady who may want family. It depends, if, in my opinion, if it's an attractive young lady, the manager will evict her for that.
Wow. So, it almost seems like the conditions here, I mean, you have poor living conditions, de-investment in the homes, but you have kids and families. It's almost like it's sort of reinvigorating poverty. I mean, it's, in a way, it becomes a trap. Is that what we're dealing with, this public housing? I mean, what is it at this point?
Dickens wrote about it, in a previous century, that people are living in really incredibly bad situations, and there are government bureaucracies that are collaborating with private for-profit companies and taking public tax dollars, and the end result of that is the racial wealth gap in Baltimore, where there's a 2-to-1 difference between the median wealth of white Baltimoreans and the median wealth of African-American Baltimoreans. A third of all African-American Baltimoreans have 0 net worth. Historically, because of segregation and redlining, black families haven't been able to build up wealth.
Very true.
And our schools have decayed because beginning in the 1970s, a previous administration began to pull money out of the Baltimore City public schools so that they could put it into downtown development. There's a lot of good research on this. So we've allowed the school systems to decay. All these things work together to exacerbate the racial wealth gap that has influenced white supremacy in Baltimore. And now we do have the tent city folks that have very specifically a conscious effort to do something about white supremacy, but we really need to support their work.
Well, just so people know, there was a protest outside City Hall. People put tents because really the city has not had any sort of, I would think it would be safe to say, a concerted plan to address homelessness, and it's gotten worse. And, well, I don't know, is that...
Well, there's been a plan. In 2007, we wrote a plan to abolish homelessness.
But that...
It was never implemented.
But Stephanie really, well, the preceding administration after Dixon really didn't follow through on that, right?
Worse than didn't follow through. For example, the plan said that Housing First is Baltimore's model for abolishing homelessness.
Explain Housing First.
And Housing First means that you do outreach to people living on the street, you put them into their own apartments, and then you provide whatever services they might need, whether they're addiction treatment or mental health services, physical health services, education, employment training, all that. You do that after someone has a decent place to live. That's Housing First.
That
it works really well. It's been evaluated many times. Generally, 85% of folks who are put into their own houses straight from the street stay in those houses 5 years later and 10 years later.
That's amazing.
Right?
That's wonderful.
There's good. So it works. The city adopted it in 2007 and never ever implemented it, and instead of that they've been closing encampments, destroying the belongings of people who live in the encampments.
And are they trying to sort of do litmus tests to keep people out of housing?
Well, they do something called assessments. There's this racket called assessments that the homeless industrial complex has created.
Wow, there's a homeless industrial complex.
There is, and it's $2 billion a year of federal funds and lots more in state and local funds. And a lot of people get employed through it. I used to. And, you know, some people make decent salaries doing it. But this assessment business is they insist that before you can put someone into their house, you have to assess all of their needs. It's contrary to the real Housing First approach. People sell the assessments. There are companies that were set up just to write and sell assessments.
Yeah, go ahead, Lucky. I'm sorry.
When I was at Tent City, it was at least 6 groups doing the assessments. At least 6 of them. So they'll tell you where the money at. But let's keep in mind, we talking about homeless first. Now, if you count the people that's sleeping on their sister, their mother, their grandmother, couch.
Transitional housing or whatever.
Because there's no progressive outreach. Why, if you recall, I believe at 1029 Pratt Street, the Housing Authority number, I would think you give me your name, I can tell you where your name at on the list, but it's kind of insulting to tell someone you 109,000 on the list when it already no houses. So people get frustrated, then people move several times so the information able to get to them. But my whole thing have been, I understand the need for assessment, but Housing First is the model. Put them in the house, then assess them. That's called wraparound services. We don't have that in Baltimore. Now they moved the Tent City people up to a elementary school in West Baltimore. And we know what the type of health problems that elementary schools, middle schools have in Baltimore. And there, I've seen myself, young children in there. I know the building where they're at is not fit for human consumption. But the housing allowed it because our political power made that happen like that.
Can I just add one thing about this tent city? One of the reasons why the tent city stayed right on, let's say, Mayor Pugh's doorstep for as long as it did is because women were going there for safety reasons. Women were going to these tents to stay on the front lawn of City Hall because they were safe there, because women who are homeless are incredibly subjected to rape, to violence, to theft on the street, and that's where they went to be safe. So if our city says they care about women, they care about children, they care about families, they really need to address homelessness and reinstate, as you said, the Homeless First policy.
Well, this is great. Let's wrap this up.
Excuse me, Housing First policy.
So basically what we have here is no homeless policy, tax breaks to wealthy developers, and tremendous uncertainty with the women in Perkins homes.
Women and children unsafe.
How do we get out of this? I mean, where is it? What do we do?
Let me just speak about Perkins Home and the issues that you brought up. It was seen to me that the new executive director of housing would impanel people to go knock door to door and see what happened and then do an investigation. But in the meanwhile, move the staff, switch staffs. Send like the McCullough Home staff to Perkins and move the Perkins staff to McCullough Home so the people, the residents, can feel as though they can talk and something being done. This the problem. Nothing is being done. Only thing I believe the administration of housing understand is lawsuit, liability. That's the only thing.
Jeff, I mean, is there any way to change this public policy? You know, I mean, obviously we're in a terrible situation with the Trump administration. Could we have any control at the local level to make some sort of...
We should. And for example, there's an organization in Baltimore called Communities United. Communities United is organizing the people who live in Perkins Homes and McCullough and Gilmore. And on October 18th, in fact, I'm convening a meeting at the School of Social Work, University of Maryland School of Social Work, of the Communities United folks, their tenant organizers, and the School of Social Work folks to work on this issue of how do we change the policies? How do we move democracy into public housing? How do we have public policies that benefit our poor neighbors rather than public policies that benefit the rich?
One thing that will end it on you, talk about the anxiety, what it's like to live in public housing. They don't really know where they're going to be.
Right, well, that was one of the things that really struck me, is that the women didn't have any clear information. They were told, once again, that a group of people were going to come in, make their lives better, repair their homes, and that they were going to be able to still live in the community. But they really don't know the truth. And so there's incredible insecurity. And these are women with children who are trying to take care of their families.
Some people 5, 6 children.
5 or 6 kids sometimes, and they are the primary caretaker, the primary caregiver for their relatives and for their children. And for them not to know where they're going to be living a year from now is incredibly disheartening for them, incredibly stressful for them.
And I think we should all think about that. I mean, you know, housing, as Jeff has pointed out, you know, getting people housing first stabilizes them. It's not, you know, it's not one the other way around. And not to know where you're going to be living, if you're going to have a place to live.
If you're going to have a home that
it's
you
just
can
got to
afford.
create tremendous amount of psychological stress.
And to add to the anxiety, when they turn on the news, when they open up the newspaper, and they see that the people who are supposed to be making decisions really don't know what decisions need to be made.
Well, we got a lot of soul searching during the country where we enrich developers and we take women with families and create anxiety and poverty and horrible living conditions. I mean, if we don't change this. But anyway, I really appreciate it. Jeff, Lucky, Taya, thank you so much. We'll continue this conversation. This is Stephen Janis, and thank you for joining me on The Real Baltimore.